Welcome back to Introduction to AP Human Geography. In this unit, we will explore how the concepts of culture frame the shared behaviors of a society. We'll start with characteristics that are easy to observe, for example, food, art, clothing, and language, and then we'll analyze the nuances, like notions of beauty, gender roles, views on how to raise children, that aren't so easy to see, but are really what make us all so unique. Because culture varies by place and region, we'll start with a case study example, and then you will have an opportunity to explore other cultures that interest you as we continue to bridge the gap into what makes us all human. I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Dan Brooks. He's here to share with you his experiences with a culture unlike any other on Earth.
Thank you, Dana. And hi, my name is Dan Brooks. I'm a videographer, photographer, ethnographer, and former adventurer. Now, while I now live in Austin, Texas, and have done for the last few years, I previously lived for almost 20 years in Indonesia, during which time I worked as a wildlife and travel photographer and explored many of the furthest reaches of that island nation. Possibly my most incredible journeys, though, were into the far eastern and remote province of West Papua, formerly known as Irian Jaya, home to some of the most primitive tribes anywhere on Earth. Due to its remoteness and rugged terrain, West Papua is the most linguistically varied place on Earth. The number of languages spoken across the island, which includes the eastern province of Papua New Guinea, ranges between 300 and 700, which represents an incredible 70% of the world's spoken languages. The island has been continuously inhabited by humans for almost 50,000 years, and there are tribes on the island whose existence has only been verified in the last few decades. With a combined population of less than 1 million across an area the size of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama combined, West Papua is one of the most sparsely populated and least explored areas on the planet. Even today, there are vast swathes of maps that show no details whatsoever. In today's presentation, we'll be introducing 3 different tribes in 3 different parts of West Papua, each of which has something different to say about the unique cultures of primitive man. Later, in my more detailed talks, I'll be going into greater detail about each of these tribes and their cultural and historical significance, but in this talk we'll just be doing a brief overview and introduction. In 1938, flying a reconnaissance mission from the northern coast to the southern and flying over a mountain range that marks the center of the island of Papua, the zoologist explorer Richard Archibald unexpectedly came across a valley which was not only completely hidden and unknown, but also had signs of inhabitation which was completely unexpected. This later became known as the Baliem Valley, and over 50 miles long and 20 miles wide, it later became known that this was undiscovered and undisturbed for over 40,000 years, and it was home to a Paleolithic civilization unlike any that had ever been seen before. Later, and famously documented by the renowned author Peter Mathiasson in his book Under the Mountain Wall, the tribespeople of the valley, the Dani, offer a glimpse into the cultural practices and farming techniques from the Stone Age. And to this day, the Baliem Valley is almost as difficult to get into as it was 70 years ago. And there's limited tourism, and most of the rites and practices of the Dani people remain the same today as they have been for countless generations. Unlike the Dani people of the Baliem Valley, whose discovery came with a stroke of fortune, the Kuruwai people, who live in a vast area to the south of the Baliem Valley, were a complete mystery until the 1970s. And the expedition that I was on to film a documentary of them in the mid-1990s was the first recorded contact they had ever had with Westerners, and to a large part, any outsiders at all. The Kuruwai are also the only people who are officially recognized as tree dwellers, and also as functional cannibals. That is to say that cannibalism for the Kuruwai is a matter of diet, and appears to have no cultural significance or overlay. As a nomadic tribe, the Kuruwai live in small family groups in wooden homes perched precariously high above the forest floor, as high as 50 yards up in a tree. Living as they do in thick lowland forests with limited viable sources of protein and nutrition, the Kuruwai subsist on a very basic diet of sago and sago grubs. Now, once in a while they may catch a wild boar or find plantains, but the impact of this low-quality diet shows in their diminutive stature. The chief of the family group that we filmed was no taller than a 6th grader. In this context, semi-nomadic tribes living with limited resources in family groups, the necessity of defense against intruders occasionally provides for a family meal. Cannibalism is simply a consequence of self-defense and limited food supply. One of the more historically fascinating tribes, and one with a particular connection to the United States, are the Asmat people of southern Papua, who live in a wide, swampy area bordering the shallow Arafura Sea. They became world famous one day back in the 60s for possibly eating the scion of a famous American family. Michael Rockefeller, son of Nelson Rockefeller, was an avid collector of primitive art and had visited the shores of the Asmat people on several occasions, collecting pieces for the Museum of Primitive Art in New York, where they're still displayed to this day. Likely against the wishes of his family, he continued to seek the much sought-after bis poles of the Asmat, tall, ornate carved totem poles, which were often seen displayed outside village longhouses. These poles symbolized blood debt, a reminder of a killing that needed to be avenged from one village or one group of people to another. Now, on one day in 1963, Michael disappeared forever, and despite the attention of both the Indonesian and United States governments and all the media that came along with it, it was never exactly clear what had happened to him, but it was suspected that he had fallen victim to the Asmat cycle of ceremonial cannibalism. In the third of the films that you'll be watching later, I'll go into more detail about why this was necessary for the Asmat according to their worldview, despite the fact that they knew and liked Michael, and how many years it took for the truth to finally come out.
Thank you, Dan. As you just saw, there are fascinating elements to culture that go much deeper than what we see on the surface. The challenge in this unit is to not look at other cultures as failed attempts to be us, but as unique manifestations of the Spirit. And as Wade Davis also said, the world in which you were born is just one model of reality. Enjoy learning about the different elements and patterns of culture in this unit. Use the tools of analysis of other cultures to analyze your own culture, and you might be surprised that you will develop the power to look at something you see every day in a whole new way. See you in class.